In the cold waters of the North Atlantic, on a foggy morning in 1936, cargo ship drifted along, its engines running, its deck lights still burning, but not a single soul on board. This is the story of the SS Solitude, a mystery that remains unsolved nearly 90 years later. The SS Solitude was a mid-sized cargo vessel that had set sail from the port of Halifax, Canada, bound for Lisbon, Portugal. Aboard were 14 crew members, led by Captain Edmund Caro, an experienced and well-regarded seaman with 20 years of dependable voyages behind him. The ship carried ordinary cargo, timber, iron tools, and a few mail crates. It was a routine journey, with no hint of danger anywhere on the horizon. On the 7th day of the voyage, the radio operator sent a brief message to the Coast Guard, a standard position report, with no sign of distress. But exactly 11 hours later, when the next scheduled message was due, the radio produced nothing but static. No reply ever came. 3 days later, a Spanish fishing boat discovered the ship near the Azores Islands, nearly 400 kilometers off its intended route. The vessel was still moving, slowly, as if someone were still at the helm. But what the fishermen found once they boarded would haunt some of them for the rest of their lives. There was no one aboard, not a single person. The lifeboats were all still in place, not one was missing. In the captain's cabin, a half-eaten plate of food sat on the table, along with a cup of coffee that still held liquid, though it had long gone cold. In the engine room, everything ran as normal. The coal was still burning. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no indication of any fight. Even stranger, the ship's logbook was found, but its final entry contained nothing about danger, just one line, written in the captain's own hand, which would later baffle investigators for decades. The line consisted of only 3 words: "They have returned." Who were they? What had returned? And the biggest question of all, how could 14 men vanish silently from a moving ship? The Portuguese and British navies launched a joint investigation. At first, piracy was suspected, but nothing was missing from the cargo, and even the cash kept in the captain's cabin remained untouched. Then, mutiny was considered, but there was no evidence of any struggle, and the crew's personal belongings, even their shoes and coats, were found neatly arranged, as if they hadn't left in a hurry, as if they never even knew they wouldn't be coming back. For the first few weeks of the investigation, no satisfying answer emerged, but news of the Solitude gradually spread through the media, and with it came a wave of theories, some plausible, some entirely supernatural. The first theory was meteorological. Some speculated that a sudden, massive rogue wave had struck the ship and swept the crew overboard. But this theory collapsed when weather experts confirmed that the sea that night had been unusually calm, wind speeds of only a few knots, with no storm recorded within hundreds of kilometers. The second theory involved poisoning, possibly carbon monoxide leaking from the ship's coal supply, rendering the crew unconscious before they, in a panic, leapt into the water. This was a far more grounded theory, and for many years it remained the most widely accepted explanation. However, it had one major flaw. The engineers who worked in the engine room showed no such symptoms because their bodies were never found at all, and gas poisoning typically leaves some remains aboard rather than causing people to vanish into the water. But a decade later, in 1947, an event gave this mystery a new twist. In a remote fishing village in Portugal, an elderly fisherman, near death, gave a confession to the local priest, one the priest later recorded in his diary, which researchers discovered many years afterward. The old man claimed that on the night in question, he had been out in his small fishing boat not far from the Solitude. He had seen the ship's deck lights burning, and he had heard singing, a strange, tuneless humming sound, as though many voices were chanting something together, but in no language he recognized. Then, in his own words, the water around the ship grew unnaturally still, so still it felt as if the sea itself were holding its breath. Frightened, he turned his boat around and never spoke of it to anyone until his deathbed. Though this confession carried no scientific weight, it breathed new life into local folklore. Among the old sailors sailors of the Azores. A legend had circulated long before this that somewhere in the deep sea lies a place of stillness where the water never ripples, and any ship that mistakenly crosses it, its crew feels a strange calling, as if someone beneath the water is summoning them. The sailors called it simply the calling. Science, of course, gives no credence to this legend, but modern researchers have pointed to a grounded possibility that eerily mirrors the folklore: mass hallucination. A long sea voyage, exhaustion, and possibly some fungal contamination in the food supply, such as ergot, could together have triggered intense collective delusion among the crew, leading them to jump into the sea together, believing they were escaping some danger or answering some call. Such mass hallucination events are rare in history, but not entirely unknown. To this day, no wreckage of the SS Solitude has ever needed to be searched for because it never sank. The ship was repaired and put back into service, though its later owners claimed the crew often heard strange humming sounds at night coming from the engine room, sounds that matched no mechanical thought. In 1952, the ship was scrapped for unknown reasons, and its final owner never explained the decision. What happened to those 14 men remains unknown to this day. No bodies were ever found, no wreckage ever recovered, and those 3 words, "they have returned," still hang in the pages of history as an unsolved question. Who had returned? What did they want? And the most chilling question of all is that place of stillness in the ocean, still out there, waiting for the next ship to cross it.